Good morning, everyone, and thank you all for joining us today. This morning, we're here to take the first step in addressing the shortfalls of city government and our counterparts at quasi-agencies like HABC before and during the horrific mass shooting in Brooklyn homes on July 2nd, 2023. This morning, we officially released a combined after-action report that examines what each agency who are represented here today either did or, most importantly, did not do. That very night when I arrived on scene, I began having a conversation with our Chief Administrative Officer, Faith Leach, and Commissioner Worley that we needed a detailed, unabashed accounting of what led to this mass shooting and how we responded to it. As the events of that night and the following days unfolded, it became clear that the accounting should be inclusive of every city agency who played a role. I wanted to make sure the assessment we would ultimately produce was comprehensive and uncompromising, utilizing best practices that have been developed after other mass shooting events like Vegas or the Pulse nightclub shooting in Florida. And that is what I feel we have with this document. This mass shooting is one of the most painful chapters in our city's history, which has had more than its fair share of painful chapters. We lost 2 young lives, Aaliyah Gonzalez, whose mom I've spoken to several times and who came to share her story of pain and hope for our city last night at our community engagement meeting, Khalees, who should be going about their lives and pursuing their dreams. Instead, their families join the dozens and dozens of others who are dealing with the trauma of this event and the devastating impact that it will have on them and our city forever. These reports and this press conference are rightfully focused on city government's actions, but we have never stopped pursuing the justice that Brooklyn homes and Baltimore as a whole deserves. There were individuals who made the cowardly, reckless decision to pull the trigger that night with any regard for human lives around them, and we will not rest until we hold all of them accountable. This investigation has not and never will slow down until it is fully complete. The only way that we can begin to heal the trauma is to begin by focusing on accountability. Accountability for those who committed the crime. Accountability for the police or anyone who showed indifference. Accountability for city government that made missteps. And then taking action to ensure that this never happens again in our city. That is why I tasked the city administrator with bringing together BPD, HABC, MONSE, OEM, and the fire department to craft these individual independent after-action reports. I was also clear that while I wanted a detailed accounting of mistakes made and actions taken or not taken, I also wanted each report to identify clear recommendations on actions that city government should be taking. I want to be explicit with all Baltimoreans. We are setting a path forward with the goal of ensuring every mistake outlined in these reports is never repeated. The document also begins with a memo drafted by the city administrator, which arose from her efforts leading this process and includes other recommendations, which are in addition to the ones that each agency report focus on: interagency collaboration and coordination. I will pursue these recommendations immediately and ensure they are implemented as swiftly as possible. There are more than a dozen of these recommendations included in the compiled document, but there are a few that I want to lift up. 1, we will be convening the Brooklyn community specifically to provide space for a dialogue about these reports, their findings, and their recommendations. 2, we will be continuing our efforts to wrap our arms around that community by continuing and, in some cases, expanding the services that our teams have been diligently providing since July the 2nd. 3, we are expanding the way that agencies communicate with each other and with the community about events around the city, both permitted and unpermitted. 4, we are taking another look at what state legislation we can pursue that may have an impact on this event, like changes to home monitoring systems that we know has consistently been an issue in Baltimore City. I mentioned this briefly at the beginning, but it's important to note that through this process, the agencies ran their own after-action report efforts and independently drafted them. You'll notice as you review the document that each of the reports have retained their independent identity, and that was done intentionally because this is about each agency looking internally at themselves. Because of the scope and the length of this report, we're not going to be able to get to every detail included in them, so I've asked each agency here to discuss the process that their team went through and note a couple key highlights, and we will jump into questions after that. We'll begin with Commissioner Worley.
Yes, sir. Good morning. Thank you, Mayor Scott and other members of the Cabinet who have joined us here today. In the early morning hours of July 2nd, Mayor Scott, Chief Administrative Officer Leach, and I were on the scene of Brooklyn, and we vowed to find out what happened, how it occurred, and why, and to fix it. Within 24 hours of the incident, I directed our Compliance Bureau, led by Deputy Commissioner Eric Melanson, to launch a comprehensive after-action report into everything that occurred before, during, and after the incident. We know we made mistakes. It was important that our after-action report not only mentioned those mistakes, highlighted those mistakes and the shortcomings, but also provides recommendations to improve and learn from. We will continue to fix what went wrong and ensure better responses and strengthen our relationships within the community to ensure something like this never happens again. In the midst of completing our report, we also uncovered actions of some personnel after the incident that were heroic and will be addressed and identified, and those officers will receive recognition. I want to be very clear, this report is the very first process. It was done and put out. There are now internal investigations that are taking place as a result of this. We're still going to continue to gather information. We'll investigate any additional information that comes to light with the goal of making the department better. At the same time, our detectives continue to work around the clock on the criminal investigations. Any reports of this investigation winding down are simply untrue and, more importantly, irresponsible. We will continue to work with our local, state, and federal partners during this investigation. Today, I want to announce that the reward for information related to this incident has been escalated to $88,000. My hope is that this comprehensive review provides transparency and helps the department continue to build trust with the residents and with the public overall. I will end that BPD will and can do better. Thank you for this time. Now I'll turn it over to the Housing Authority Chief.
Good morning. I want to thank the mayor. I want to thank Mayor Scott and his team for taking the important steps to look at the incident that happened at Brooklyn Homes on July 2nd. First and foremost, we must not forget the individuals and families who have been deeply impacted by this incident. Our hearts and prayers continue to be with every victim, family members, and resident. It has been a challenging time for Baltimore City. As we continue to help the community heal, it is important that we reflect on our response and actions immediately following the incident. We conducted an internal review and identified key findings and recommendations for the agency. Our review has been incorporated into the city's larger report, and it is also available on our website. As we continue to look at the recommendations that we provided through our team, the team was started doing their analysis the time we hit the ground. We realized there were several key items that we needed to address. Number one, security. As you all know, the Housing Authority no longer employ a police department. However, we have since engaged armed security through contract services, and as of 8/1, those services are being provided at Brooklyn Homes. We also look at our 800 number. We have a 24-hour emergency number, but we realize that the importance of making sure residents are aware of what that number should be used for and when it should be used was lacking, and that our agency will now implement and take every measures necessary to share that information with our residents. We also looked at our emergency preparedness plan. We do have an emergency preparedness plan that was first put together with the agency and with outside consultant. We realized that there was a gap. So we are in negotiations to bring that team back into the Housing Authority to conduct tabletop exercises with our team, but also to update our plan. We're also working closely with the city, as the mayor mentioned, to ensure that our activities on our property, whether it's an outside sponsored event or an internal sponsored event, that it is permitted properly and that they are following every necessary steps to ensure our residents' safety. As we continue to look at ourselves and we continue to look at this incident, we cannot begin to take the time to say to everyone, we as HABC understand the frustration that everyone feels. And we're clear about how we will move forward in working with our families. We want to make sure that when our community joins together, we can realize opportunities that promote safe neighborhoods, which is what we continue to promote at HABC. Thank you.
Good morning, all. My name is Stephanie Mavronis, Interim Executive Director of the Mayor's Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement. MONSE has been the lead agency responsible for the implementation of the Mayor's Coordinated Neighborhood Stabilization Response, or CNSR, in the immediate aftermath of the Brooklyn Homes mass shooting on July 2nd. My agency's After Action report centers on that activation in Brooklyn Homes, as well as the role of violence intervention work, both at Brooklyn Day prior to the mass shooting and in the weeks after the incident. First, I want to take this moment to publicly thank all of the more than 60 community-based partners, service providers, and city and state agencies who immediately mobilized to provide resources and support to the Brooklyn community, including our Safe Streets staff, who continued showing up for this community while dealing with their own trauma from the incident to render support for their neighbors and work to shift cultural norms associated with the acceptability of gun violence. In the initial weeks post-incident, our team touched over 370 individuals based on sign-ins, and we estimate that that number is actually much larger when we think about some of the general outreach that our team was engaged in during that CNSR activation. This was and needed to be a massive undertaking to address the immense amount of trauma in the community and qualifies as MONSE's largest CNSR to date. In our After Action report, the public can expect to find an outline of what went well, as well as opportunities for improvement, findings and recommendations that were the result of our team conducting an intense feedback process after the first week and a half of our stabilization efforts. Although the 45 days of immediate stabilization have passed, MONSE will continue to work with local organizations in Brooklyn, faith leaders, and other providers to remain engaged and support community-led event planning for Brooklyn Homes residents. Much of this work, as we outlined in our report, has already begun. There's no end date to our community support, and we thank the Brooklyn community for their honesty, candor, and trust in the past 2 months. I want to end by recognizing that while this incident has greatly traumatized many direct and indirect victims within the Brooklyn community, as well as the entire city of Baltimore, we will not stop working to facilitate healing, address residual trauma, and move forward as a village to improve the safety of Baltimoreans regardless of zip code. I'm proud of the speed and diligence of my team, who activated in a matter of hours and immediately brought resources into this community to help stabilize. I'm proud of the unprecedented magnitude of partnership and collaboration with our fellow agencies, including the police department, OEM, the fire department, and housing authority to support this community. And I remain proud of this administration's steadfast commitment to tackling violence by focusing on integrated solutions, including mediation, violence intervention, victim services, alongside traditional law enforcement. It's important to remind Baltimore that prior to this administration, there was no central place where victims of gunshot or secondary victims of violence could go to receive victim services. That's changed, and we saw agencies responsible for victim services, from MONSE, BPD to State's Attorney's Office, on site working together to effectively serve Brooklyn Homes residents. It was only in the last year, in 2022, that we first piloted Coordinated Neighborhood Stabilization Response, and MONSE was prepared to quickly mobilize despite the unprecedented scale of this incident. This is work that MONSE, under the mayor's leadership, has built from the foundation up within city government, and we'll continue pushing ourselves to improve on every single aspect within our portfolio to drive these efforts forward for Baltimore. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is James Wallace. I'm the acting chief of the fire department. As acting chief of the department, I'm speaking on behalf of the department as well as the Office of Emergency Management. Our reports, which you have in writing, also reflect our actions as well as shortcomings, and they also present
recommendations and pathways forward for improvement. They are formatted in a series of timelines. They're reflective of actions taken by our 911 call takers, our dispatchers, our field providers, incident commanders, and importantly, our mutual aid partners. Our reports encompass timelines beginning with initial 911 data, and they conclude with the sustained recovery efforts in the Brooklyn community over subsequent days and weeks. Data collected is based on two factors: CAD data and employee interviews. Upon receiving initial notifications and dispatch of this incident, our EMS and fire suppression resources were on scene within minutes. This was an extraordinarily difficult and complicated incident scene, as it not only encompassed the Brooklyn Homes area, it also expanded over to Harbor Hospital. Although patients were scattered initially throughout a 6 square block area, we were quickly able to identify each and every patient that warranted care, assessed and immediately transported them to more definitive care. I want to thank our fire and EMS personnel for their quick action under extraordinary conditions, and I also want to express my thanks to our mutual aid partners, our state partners, our private partners, and especially our hospitals. We'll continue to review our after-action report. We will continue to take a deeper dive into the data we have, and we will improve things moving forward. I'm extraordinarily proud not only of the initial response, but of the Office of Emergency Management for their actions moving forward in support of Monsi and Mayor Scott's administration in subsequent days. Thank you.